A lot of what we have gone through in our lives have shaped us.
I had trained in fine wine, I had worked in champagne. Because I was a journalist who wasn't afraid to tackle the difficult conversations, I think that's a really important part of my history.
You're ambitious, you have such vision.
If I'd listened to 100 people who told me that was the most ridiculous idea ever, I wouldn't be sitting here with a global brand. I think some people are afraid of change, really afraid of change.
Hi, I'm Caroline Cary and welcome to the Eat Nourish Love Podcast. For over 20 years, I've created events, raised over 4 million for good causes, and been lucky enough to meet some incredible people along the way. This podcast is about exploring stories and insights that really shape us, with inspiring guests from wellness, business, self-care and personal growth. It's about learning to trust our intuition and discovering what truly matters, and how, with hard work, belief and tenacity, we can make so many things happen. I'm so excited to have you, Amanda. Honestly, it was an introduction, came to see you in London. It's one of those sort of relationships that just hit off, didn't it? It was just like we talked. We could have gone on talking for hours, and understanding what you've created here. So a bit of background. So Amanda Thomson is the CEO and founder of Thomson Scott. It's a B Corp-certified company. We can come on to what all that means later. It's a premium non-alcoholic portfolio of some incredible sparkling wines and red wine, white wine, rosé, etc. But you were a BBC arts broadcaster, you were a journalist, and then suddenly something happened and you decided to pivot, go and live in Paris with your husband and 2 children and go and study the Diploma of Wine at the Cordon Bleu. I mean, that's extraordinary.
It's kind of a crazy story, isn't it? And I think if I heard about it third person, I would think it was crazy. I mean, you know, we reframe everything. It sounds so romantic now, which, you know, parts of it were. But actually, you know, like anyone's found a story, there were tears, there was drama, there was expense, there were challenges. But the North Star, I guess, at that point actually was creating incredible champagne with no or low sugar and just trying to create the perfect ripeness from the fruit. It was all about champagne. That was kind of my obsession. I was obsessed with drinking great wine in small ways, but trying to focus on purity. So the romanticism actually came from beautiful drinking, but being quite choosy about drinking, which I guess is highly pertinent to what I'm doing today with non-alcoholic, but it's been a crazy journey.
But I think one of the most important things is the fact that you're in such an incredible space at the moment. I mean, what you started 6 years, was it 6 years ago?
2019.
People weren't talking about the sugar. Non-alcoholic wine particularly wasn't really on the radar, you know, whereas now it's just taking off. And I think the trends of 2025 and what people are looking at in terms of their health and wellness and food isn't just about how they look and diet, and it's about longevity. It's about what we're doing here. And you've created this brand with a wine that is sold worldwide in some of the most prestigious places. And what an incredible journey. So what's the process? Because it's obviously quite a difficult industry to be in.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack. It was hugely challenging to create. I'm always trying to innovate. So I'm working on an elevated red at the moment and an elevated sparkling, mainly for high-end restaurants and hospitality. To some degree, I had to rip up the rule book. And what I mean by that is I trained in fine wine at Cordon Bleu, you know, the most prestigious institute for culinary pursuits in the world, arguably. And that was my buzz, you know, fine wine and great winemakers. I always saw great winemakers as artists. I still do. And I had to let a lot of that go when I was trying to find great makers to collaborate in non-alcoholic wine. And that's not to say that my makers aren't great. They are now. But it was challenging to find them. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. And I think we have to almost draw a line arguably from when I launched Noughty to what came before. And what I mean by that was, this is by no means pejorative, but the non-alcoholic wines that had existed before weren't for fine wine lovers. That's not being rude or negative. It's just factual. So I didn't even know they existed, because most of us who drank good wine didn't really know non-alcoholic wine existed, because most people thought it was like sparkling grape juice or like a sort of apple ties, for those of you who live in the UK, or I think, is it a Welch's, I think, in the US, which of course have their place, but they're not usually poured and sat alongside good wine. And that was sort of the point, was could I create something that I was comfortable personally to drink, that could sit and really integrate into my wine world. And it transpired there were millions of other drinkers like me around the world who were not being served at all with all that white space, who were wine drinkers, who, when we weren't drinking, would drink generally sparkling water. I mean, that was always my go-to. And anecdotally, I found out that was most people's go-to, because you don't want sugary sodas, you don't want mocktails because you don't have a relationship with spirit-based cocktails. And you certainly don't want non-alcoholic beer because you haven't really necessarily got a strong relationship with beer when you're out socializing. And I think, it's not desperately fashionable to talk about gender, is it? But if we look historically, most gatekeepers in the high echelons of the drinks world have always been men. It's changing now with different generations. And I feel like most people thought in the industry that wine had been catered for, because they're like, oh, we've got those sort of non-alcoholic cocktails and we've got non-alcoholic beer, so that piece is done, tick. And it transpires there was all of that white space waiting for Noughty, which was for wine lovers like me who weren't being served when we weren't drinking. And a lot of us don't drink a lot. So I was never a wine drinker who drank a lot anyway. So therein lay a huge opportunity.
And I think that's what's so lovely, because you haven't gone out to be preachy. You're giving people an alternative. And I think you've always said that, if you're offered a beautiful glass of champagne, you're going to have that glass of champagne. But Noughty is come in as a moderation. It's come in as an alternative. The wine has never been, well, in my experience, hasn't been that great. I always remember I was always asking for Perrier water because there was nothing like sparkling water when we were growing up. And also, I mean, the beer, they've done very well. There's some really good 0% non-alcoholic beers out there, and the Guinness 0%, people love that. But the wine has always been much, much more challenging, because it has, hasn't it? I mean, it's been quite a challenging area to go into.
Oh, absolutely. And if I'd, sat here and sort of looking back to 2019, most people thought I was crazy. I used to get quite rude comments, like really quite rude. I mean, I guess the drink space, and particularly the wine space, is very interesting. People are quite vocal about opposition. And I think I had developed quite a hard shell as a journalist, and I was always very trend-led. I think journalists, you're always aware of zeitgeist. And of course, timing is everything, right? You can be too early. I had a sparkling rosé in Cannes years ago. Yeah. And as Malcolm Gladwell would say, that was way too early for the tipping point. But I think what was interesting was my innate belief that if I could crack this, I would be onto something. And obviously, one looks now in 2025 and everyone says to me, oh, the timing was perfect. So it's interesting the way things come together. But I think that blind faith, focus, passion, gut feeling were all incredibly necessary to what I did, because I was patronized left, right, and center, which has always been an interesting concept to me, because I think innovators in any space, but particularly in the wine world, I would speak for, are often put down, because any industry that comes with great history, I think some people are afraid of change, really afraid of change. And I think that because I had trained in fine wine, because I had worked in champagne, because I was a journalist who wasn't afraid to tackle the difficult conversations, I think that's a really important part of my history. Because otherwise, if I'd listened to 100 people who told me that was the most ridiculous idea ever, I wouldn't be sitting here with a global brand.
So you mentioned a few things there, which I'd like to unpack, because you talked about your gut feeling and your intuition. You also have worked in two very, very male-dominated areas. Now, I'm a great believer in women and business, etc., etc. But also, I think we can learn an awful lot from being in a male-dominated environment. I think particularly sort of with clarity. I think they're quite left brain. They're quite direct. They know exactly where they're going, and I think it's the gut feeling. Is that sometimes and I talk gut feeling, intuition, whatever you want to call it, but sometimes you just get that hunch. And I often feel that when you then go and write that letter or email that person or go and write it down, that's the thing that actually makes you jumpstart something or move something forward. And I think that you've been very brave in the industry. And I mean, how has it been? Has it been quite difficult?
Oh, it's been extremely difficult, and it doesn't get easier because I'm trying to create a global household name brand. Well, certainly in the US, UK, as the pillars, and that's never going to be easy, right? So I think the challenges get bigger, you get more adept at dealing with them. It's all a shift day by day, isn't it? Momentum. And of course, you get much more confident dealing with the massive challenges. So it all gets kind of framed differently, I think. But it's hugely exciting. And I guess I've since sort of had to unpack this, because people have asked me, and I just do it naturally. So I'm unpacking it now with you. But I've been told, being a visionary founder, where I've always known the big opportunity, the big picture. I've always planned to create a household name, and then I've worked upwards from there, not the other way round. And I always say to entrepreneurs, I do mentoring, and I always say to anyone who's creating anything, what do you want this to be? And I'm shocked, because I thought everybody thought like this, and now I've learned they don't. I'm shocked that most people don't really think about what they want it to be. And what I mean by that is, a lifestyle business that gives people, a really good life and puts food on the table, or, that's one thing, and that's brilliant. To do what I'm doing, I'm making sacrifices every day. Will I still have friends? Will my family speak to me? I mean, you become quite one-dimensional. There's no question. If you're building something like I'm building, it's very difficult, because I bleed naughty. I talk about it you become obsessed. It is your singular driver, and that's not for the faint-hearted, and it's not for everybody. And you could argue from a wellness perspective, it's not ideal. So I think that, what do you want to achieve is always my first question when I'm mentoring. And I guess I've always had that North Star goal.
So it's really interesting, because I've heard you say this before, that you've got to work out what you're good at. So it's looking at the end vision, where you want to go, the roadmap. It's so simple, but it's so often what people forget, and we all do it. We all lose sight of that. But sometimes it's about, you have your vision and you put it aside, and then and the steps, all the other stuff for training goes through it is what you do. But you've worked out what you're really good at, and if I'm right in saying it's vision and taste, is that right?
Exactly. I mean, I always say I'm good at those two things, and as soon as you recognize what you're not good at, and I think it's so important in entrepreneurship, whatever size business you're running, to recognize, have a really high degree of self-awareness and go, I'm not good at this, that, the other. So don't lose yourself in trying to be the expert there. Surround yourself with brilliant people filling in your gaps. And for example, I'm always focused on numbers, the big numbers that I need to focus on, but I'm the opposite of someone who can really dig into the spreadsheet. So from really day one, I became obsessed with making sure that a financial whiz who happens to also be an entrepreneur and a very wealthy, successful individual and an old friend, all of those things, I became obsessed with wanting him in the business early days. even though it wasn't so much his money I needed, actually, I wanted to work with him by my side because I knew that he would be the yin to my yang with just always being there. And even to this day, so he works really closely with me now, to this day, if I want to do something that's going to cost a lot of money in the business, I'll call him up and I'll say, I really want to do this. It's going to cost X. And he's like, yeah, brilliant, do that. And this carries on. And then occasionally, if we've had a tricky quarter, he'll say, well, yeah, do it, Amanda. But if you do it and we have a tricky next quarter, and then if X and Y doesn't happen, we would potentially then have to fundraise. Do you want to fundraise? No, perhaps I won't do it now then. And literally that is how we run things. And it's been so successful because I can go off in my really big picture, dream, vision like way. And then he will always ground me with what is appropriate financially. And I've run quite an unusual business I've learned in the UK, which was we wanted to get ourselves profitable early and not cash burn like a lot of the tech companies used to do, and like sadly a lot of companies are doing now and not always surviving successfully, and then use all of our profits for marketing spend, which for me is a really rational way to grow a business. But if you look back at the way we had all over romanticized that tech bubble when people were throwing money around everywhere, so many drinks brands, FMCG brands, fast moving consumer goods brands in the UK and the US, wherever, were sort of spending a lot more than they were making, and then your profitability sails away, and then you're constantly fundraising. So I've done the opposite of that model, and we have a really extremely strong infrastructure, which is, for me, the most important part of the business.
Where did that? So that's fascinating, because I think that's really important, because you're creating a premium brand here in the non-alcoholic thing. So obviously in terms of the money and the production and the cost of it on the shelf against something that might be at £4, £5, and where you're coming from. So I mean that's key. But where did that sort of mindset come from that you've got there, which is thinking slightly differently from other people?
On the job, really, and learning. And I'd always be really envious of brands early stage going, well, how have you got that big campaign in Times Square? How have you got that sort of double page in Vogue? How have you done? And I started to understand, and I'd hear companies' turnovers, so what they were literally, turning over in business. And then I'd learn behind the scenes that they weren't profitable. And then psychologically, you start to understand. Now I understand how VC works, investment works, how it all works. Classic journalist. I came in knowing a little bit about lots and not a lot about anything. And now, working with I call him my business partner, but this is the guy I'm talking about, who was this old friend. I've started. He's amazing with that side of the business, and I've learned so much. And so really on the job, but just starting to understand that obvious correlation between how can you spend all that money out? You're not making enough money. So margins, how much are you making on what you're selling? And I think we've got into this really odd world, haven't we, where everybody talks about marketing all the time, like constantly. And I think that we've really lost sight that marketing is sales. And I kind of see that to people, and they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, marketing doesn't exist unless you're selling. And people don't seem to even link those often in the market, which really confuses me, because I'm like, if we're not making money, how can we spend money? Obviously, early stage in business, I appreciate everybody might need to raise the money and then spend the money. But if you're spend more money to acquire the customers, that was obviously a relevant model and conversation. But just that really simple economics of, if you're always spending more than you're making, how can you end up with a successful business? I mean, I think we've sometimes lost sight of that sort of practical economics. And I've launched a program for really young entrepreneurs with the head of business at Wellington College. And we've really built in that idea of, right at the beginning, you get a small amount of seed funding. So you get £20. Yeah. And you've got to see initially how you can grow that. And you can lose it and fail, and that's fine. You learn from the failure. But and they do a really simple profit and loss sheet, and it's understanding and getting away from that idea that, you can sell everything on social media all of the time and, make all that noise and spend all that money. But are you actually making money? I think that piece of the jigsaw puzzle is very much ignored in a lot of the sexy entrepreneur conversation these days.
But I think this is finance and going back to schools. And I think what you're doing at Wellington College, how fascinating you're doing that. It's such a great place as well, such a great school. But it is the fact that we have learned to be a society of debt and borrowing and also raising money. I mean, some of the best companies and what they've done are the people who've done the bootstrapping, because actually they've had to go make the money themselves. They haven't relied on it. And once you start having investors and crowdfunding, you are actually like an employee, aren't you? You're subservient to your investors, and you've got to deliver and you've got to. Whereas actually, if you can bootstrap it, you're much more in control of it, and also you know that you can do it. And I think that's a really big thing. But just go back to the confidence of what you're doing. So a little bit about your upbringing. So I think wasn't your mother well ahead? Weren't you vegetarian and no sugar and everything?
Yeah, I've been plant-based all my life, which is unusual for someone from the 70s. Yeah, really unusual. I think I've got one other person I've met in my life who's the similar age. And her mother was also a hippie. But yeah, I had an unusual upbringing. My mother was a bit of a hippie at heart. And my father was from Pakistan, so he was an immigrant. I can't remember, £5 in his pocket. I don't know if it was £5, whatever, those stories. And they fell in love through aesthetics. So my mother was a child model and she was an English rose. My father came in all dashing and wanted to be a pilot and ended up in Hertfordshire because he wanted to fly planes and he could fly from Luton. And they fell in love when they were very young through looks and early romance, but they were very, very, very different people. Not just culturally. I think they could have probably moved past that, but really intrinsically. And so their marriage didn't last long at all. I was the product of the marriage, but they divorced when I was extremely young. And my father hadn't yet made any money and was working really hard to try and build his way. And my mother was trying to put food on the table. So it was a complicated upbringing. And I was... At various points, my father started to make a bit of money. And so I started to go on holiday to places like France with him. But then my mother was still struggling. And he was always very kind and generous and would give us money as soon as he made it. So it wasn't acrimonious in that regard. But I got used to sort of moving around a lot. And I would take a little suitcase. So I would have one weekend with my mother, one weekend with my grandmother, and then a weekend with my father, and then what became my stepmother. And so from an extremely young age, I remember I was very self-reliant. I can remember being maybe 3, 4, and I knew my own mind, and I was quite different from my mother because my mother was and is highly emotional and wears it, quite openly. And I remember from very young, it's hard to say if it was a decision. I think it was innate. But I was practical, grounded, driven. And I had this conversation recently privately with a bunch of entrepreneurs about confidence and how much you can teach it. And I think I was actually born confident despite odd circumstances. So I've grown up now with 2 children as well, analysing nature, nurture more. And we're getting quite deep. But I believe, looking back, I was a bit of an anomaly or not, depending how much we believe in nature, nurture. And I think I was born confident, despite the fact that my circumstances would suggest I shouldn't have been confident.
So I just wanted to thank Maggie Wellness for sponsoring this podcast. I have always been really lucky with my hair. It's always been full and healthy. I've never really needed much help. But then I was lucky enough to try some of the products from Maggie Wellness. And I cannot tell you, my hair is so much fuller, shinier, and it's growing faster than ever. If you're dealing with thinning hair, breakage, or hair loss, their shampoo, conditioner, rejuvenating serum, and supplements are designed to nourish the scalp and support healthy hair growth. What I really love too is that there are no harsh chemicals. Maggie Wellness products are 100% vegan, cruelty-free, and free from SLS, silicons, parabens, GMOs and PEGs, and they're all in beautiful, sustainable packaging. So if you want stronger, healthier hair, why not try some Omega Wellness products? And you can get 20% off, excluding bundles, with the code EAT20. If you go to the bottom of this podcast, you can see the code EAT20, and there's the link. So it is interesting, and I think I was listening to something of Joanna Lumley yesterday, and she said we're all pretty boring. I'm quite boring. I'm just a puddle, and I think ultimately we don't need to spend all our time looking at who we are, but actually a lot of what we have gone through in our lives have shaped us and given us the confidence or not. I mean, I was dyslexic. I mean, they couldn't understand why I wouldn't read. My parents gave me books, and I wouldn't read. And then I was a case study of Aston University about dyslexia, and it's all coming out now. Obviously, I've just had a conversation with Lucinda Miller, and Richard Branson said, it's a superpower. Jamie Oliver's dyslexic. But you find ways to cope. And I think it's because, you're in class, so you find ways perhaps not to read out aloud or to do these things, but then you have to find ways of building it. And I don't know where my tenacity has come from, but I have. Someone said you have the most enormous amount of energy. I've never known anyone with so much energy who gets up. But I'm also very curious. I think curiosity is such a key thing.
I could not agree more. I think that's the perfect explanation. I suppose it's framed in modern business terms as growth mindset, isn't it? Curiosity, asking questions constantly. I was a journalist. You were always curious. No question is too stupid. I mean, I think we'll go to the grave learning. And I think as soon as everybody realizes that, the world's in a better place. And actually, now I'm on my soapbox only briefly, but I always think that the most interesting conversations happen in that grey area, and we live in such a binary world now.
So as a broadcaster, if I'm rightly saying, I think you interview some incredible people like George Clooney and all sorts of people, and then you must have met some extraordinary people in the journey that you're on. As I say, you're I think someone quoted you as being one of the most biggest influences in food and drink, and where you're going with it. And I know you have huge vision. So have you met interesting people? Has it been a
Oh, yeah, always. I meet so many interesting people, so many. I mean, there's something that's just struck me recently, and I'm curious to dig into it just briefly with you, if we may, is that cultural difference has always fascinated me, like really, in a positive way, not in a negative way, to be clear. And I'm always really interested, because now I work a lot in America. I'm in America huge amounts, and then back UK. So I'm mostly working in America and UK, and then sometimes around the world. But what I have learned as a Brit that really fills me up is America, because putting all kinds of world politics to one side, I'm talking about the entrepreneurial space and just, my idea and discussing it with people. I do think that we suffer actually in the entrepreneurial world in Britain in a negative way with our tall poppy syndrome issues. I think they actually arguably hold us back. And I'm just starting to realize that, particularly when the UK has a lot of challenges economically. And I'm really struck by that. And I realize that, eventually I think negativity, all that kind of, oh, that's a silly idea. Or, oh, Caroline's doing that. Oh, why is Amanda doing this? I'm not convinced it's actually helpful to entrepreneurship. And this is something I'm digging into more psychologically. And I'm curious to know your opinion. And this isn't getting deep. It's just the superficial feeling. Because when I'm in America and I tell them what I'm doing, they want to build me up. Now, there's all kinds of arguments around that underneath. Will nothing come of it? Whatever. That's a whole different conversation. But for me, just this idea that being British, I love our humour, by the way. I am very British. But I think in the entrepreneurial space, I'm not convinced that Britishness is useful. I think we can dampen down innovation, dampen down ideas, and we don't lift people up enough early days. That's really just struck me, actually.
I came across this many years ago. So going to my story, but ultimately got 3 children. Our youngest was diagnosed with something that was pretty pretty major, and it's all on my Eat Nourish Love website, the story. And I've done a video about it, about how I had to dig deep and listen and make some quite big decisions. And it's just beautiful. It's all wonderful now. It was one of those lessons I had in life. But I decided, and this is where this all started from, is that to start looking at all our stuff that we did. So I did Reiki and reflexology, and then I took all the known harmful ingredients. This is 27 years ago, out of our personal care. So water's a chemical. So they were like propylene glycol, sodium lauryl sulfate, some of the really nasties that were in there. They're not in the products now, like they were anyway, and it was an American company, and that I started using these products. It was a network marketing company. And actually, I used to go along to a few things, and I went to hear some incredible speakers and listen to it. And actually, it built a lot of confidence, because there's a lot of rejection, because it was in sales. So you were selling these products. So we had John Abalafia, we had, just extraordinary. And I think I did the Tony Robbins. We went and did the firewall.
Amazing.
And then there was this weird thing where suddenly he asked 20 people to get up on stage to take over from the guys who were dancing behind it. And I was with a girlfriend, and she couldn't come up because they stopped her. And we went up on stage, and Tony turned around and said, "You're actually not going to do that. You've all got to dance the sexiest dance you've ever done in your life in front of 20,000 people." So 20, so 10 groups. And I have never been so scared in my life. And I was looking for how I could run away from the stage. It was up at the Excel or something. And this was 25 years ago. And anyway.
Yes, today I don't think they'd be allowed to ask you that.
Probably not. And anyway, put the music on, and then I'm going, I've just got to do this. So you dance, and I think I was just in jeans and a jumper. And then out of the audience, someone screamed, "Caroline from here and Caroline from there." And this lot was some of the network marketing, and this was my husband's cousin, who's a professor in the wellness, and so it's all these things shape us, don't they? And they.
Well, I've got so many questions. The next podcast should be about your magic mic moment.
It was just so funny, but I worked with. So I listened to the Americans, all about that strength, that positivity, and and I lived in quite a conventional world with the army, etc. And it's all so different, and this fear of not getting everything right and doing everything perfectly, it is such a pressure on everybody. And actually, it's not about perfection. If you see what's happening with even the podcasts that are happening today and people going live, it's all about being transparent, taking off the screens, off makeup, making people really real people. And I think it's beginning to wash off with us, but I think it's taken some time. So I'm so with you on all of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. And also just the ability, like you said, just to get up and be forced to do something. We do a lot with these 13, 14-year-olds, and I think it's important to get them early, because I think later we all become more cynical, but they're just about open-minded enough that you can just help them to understand that fear of doing things is like a muscle, right? Once you've done it once, twice, 3 times, like everyone, all of our age is going, "Oh, I can never get up in front of an audience." It's like you've just said, what a mortifying story, but I even was feeling the pain and you did it, and it's become an incredible story. And once you've done that, you could do anything on stage, right? You've done a sexy dance 25 years ago, you can do anything. And I think we've just got to reframe it and get Brits used to just, well, I don't know. I was about to say used to being open-minded. I find us a little close-minded, actually, culturally. Now I travel more. I do. A little close-minded and a little cynical. And I just think they're diametrically opposed to entrepreneurship. But
also it's the perfectionism. But I'm sure that, and I say you're working in a world with the alcohol and that's a very conventional, very rigid, isn't it? That world that you're working in terms of what people want. And people are wine snobs, aren't they? I mean, whether you're allowed to say that or not, I don't know.
Yes, absolutely. I was a wine snob. I self-confessed wine snob, very fussy about what I drank. I always say easy when you're not paying. But Yes, exactly. But I guess that's why we've always operated in a singular fashion. So people kind of homogenize us into groups, no low, that's all taking off, this, that, the other. Everyone always wants to argue. And we've never talked about other brands. We don't mind what anyone's doing. We just do our thing. And I think from day one, we've been extremely singular. And I think that's an important part of our success.
So just a couple of things. Will you just go through you've got 5 different ones. So this during dry Jan, which I wanted to do, I got sort of into the second week. It's like, and I had the bottle of red. I've been tempted to have the other ones, but I thought leave them full for today. Well, you can see them here, sitting here on my desk. I'll turn my camera around a bit. But I want to ask you, what does de-alcoholized red mean? What does that mean?
It's a good question. There's so much complex legislation, and I think because from 2019 onwards, when we were, I guess we're called the OG now because we were here early days in New York and London with Noughty when we launched. But it's grown up so fast with the media and the category that legislation has been struggling to keep up. And so de-alcoholized became a term that was useful to explain was once alcohol. It's not a sexy term, but we decided to embrace it because we figured there are so many wine-like products hitting the market every day, because I think everyone thinks there's a quick buck to be made, which incidentally there isn't. You can sell something once perhaps, but and we figured just really explained that it was once alcohol. So that was sort of what we adopted. And we wanted one label from a sustainability perspective. You mentioned we were B Corp-certified because there's so much legislation that's complex between US, UK, Europe. Everyone's fighting all the time. We wanted a label that we didn't have to keep pulping if legislation changed. And at the moment, that term enables us to have a universal front label. So that was another reason we wanted to clarify.
So what does a B Corp certified company mean to you? Why is it important for you?
Sure. I guess the most famous probably is Patagonia, or one of the most famous, which is the American brand with outerwear or, sort of jackets for exciting pursuits, that kind of apparel. And their philosophy is, you don't keep buying new stuff. You try to make do and mend. And if you've got a torn jacket, as I understand it, you can return it to them and they'll try to fix it. And so this idea that trying to integrate the care for the planet into your business at the infrastructure level. And so once we knew that it was really big in America, and I think we were one of the first British businesses, certainly I think we were the first drinks brand, first wine brand in the UK to get the certification. It was just to put a flag in the sand and say, we will try to do our best at all times and keep trying to be better. So the most important part is Rome wasn't built in a day. I'm shipping bottles, no company is by any means perfect when it comes to sustainability, ethics, and the future-facing environment. But it's really that obligation you sign up for. It's quite stressful because it's not like you get the badge and then you're done. Every year you have to do better, and they look at every part of your business, literally 360. So I think Jamie Oliver said it was like, having a business sort of rummage in the underwear drawer, or it's literally there's nowhere to hide with B Corp. So that was important for us. Really, just for me, it wasn't building on the mission at the end. It was baked into the mission.
Wasn't there a big thing about how to transport wine in without plastic? Did you have a thing where you were?
Yeah, I think I was the first UK business in drinks, I think, probably, certainly in wine, to use compostable packaging. And that was extremely hard and extremely expensive because, of course, doing the right thing is often expensive. And that's, of course, what stops everybody.
Well, whoever's listening to this and they order some, honestly, it comes so beautifully packaged. I love it. And actually, when I was, I had a birthday party last year, and a girlfriend did this lovely party. And there was this, I'll have to send you a photograph, a beautiful, lovely ice bucket, all these bottles of Noughty. I got to know each other, and I've got a girlfriend who said there's nothing better than having a bottle of that pink fizz sitting on the ice to open, and it really
love
just like the real thing. And it is so important. And I think this is something that I think we mentioned before, but it's about the ritual, isn't it? It's not about not doing it. It's about changing the ritual. So how do you view that?
Yeah, I mean, we are for every celebratory moment, for every everyday elevation moment. So, for example, the Noughty Blanc is always in the fridge for me, and my ritual midweek would be to come to the fridge, open that, and have that glass of refreshing, delicious white wine. It's a Chenin Chardonnay blend, and then the sparklings on the Friday, Saturday. You know, whatever your ritual is, we've got one client who this is just for me perfect. You know, a January depressing Monday morning, a Noughty sparkling mimosa. So you get your freshly squeezed orange juice, you top it up with Noughty sparkling Chardonnay. You have elevated your dark January morning. You know, I mean, what a gift.
I love that, because
I know.
thought I should just open
I
a
mean,
glass with you.
that for me is that sums it up. We take no position on alcohol as a concept. We're completely agnostic. We're all about just building in Noughty to your everyday lifestyle, everyday drinking. For me, it's about that health choice without even realizing it. That is my gift.
And I think one of the interesting things is that you were surprised. Obviously, I've been stalking you, listening to a few of your things, but you were surprised how who the people were who were drinking it and buying it, and it was often it is people who are drinking. It's not people who are dry or not drinking. It's actually the people who do drink, and it's about the moderation.
Yeah, and it's really important to recognize that our kind of original early fan base, it's almost like they found us day one, were the non-drinkers. In America, we've got some incredible sort of sober community support, and here in the UK too. So it's not like we don't care about them, and you know, they are, you know, the baseline of our opportunity, and thank God they fell in love with us early. So anyone who doesn't drink, I'm lucky enough to recognize in London and New York and various American cities, hopefully they know about us already, I would argue. For me, the big opportunity is in the wine industry, in the alcohol space, and that then means we get to potentially everybody by having Noughty on a wine list by the glass alongside your conventional wine. And there's some great places in the UK doing it beautifully. The Pig Group, Luke Harbour, who's an amazing sort of beacon of the wine industry here, and Limewood Hotel in the New Forest. Lots of places are building it in by the glass. So you'll look at the by the glass list, and you'll have your conventional champagne and English sparkling or whatever, and then Noughty's there, and then your red wines by the glass and Noughty's there. That's really how it sings. MoMA in New York, Michelin star restaurants. You know, so many places are being really smart about that, and that's when it flies. And then mixologists can build it into their non-alcoholic menus. We're going back to those simple mimosas. You can really elevate your champagne-style cocktails with our sparklings. They're doing cool stuff with our red, like kind of sangrias. So the mixologists also love Noughty because it's really pure. Because the last thing a mixologist wants is a really sugary baseline drink. Most of them want to create elevated non-alcoholic cocktails, but they might have historically had to rely on sugary things because there weren't necessarily bottles that were available.
Now, that's a really important point because it's about the sugar. So if someone is drinking non-alcoholic wines or various other things, a lot of them are full of high sugar. And actually, you know, the difference, should I say this, the difference between drinking not alcohol and sugar, there's still a problem with drinking high sugar drinks. We now know this.
Absolutely.
And
yeah,
you've created here is, well, it's not only low sugar, it's vegan. I mean, you've created such an incredible brand. So actually, it's not just about, I'm actually not going to drink, I just don't want alcohol tonight. It's actually, I don't want to have a high sugar drink. So one of the reasons I don't particularly drink a lot of cocktails is I don't like that high sugar feeling. And also I drink quite fast. So I drink quite fast.
Love the honesty.
And sometimes I don't want a gin and tonic because it's too cold. And that's why I love the red wine, and it's quite filling. And I think you've created such a great thing here. But just talk to me, how have you managed to do that with the sugar? Because that's incredible.
It's a thank you, first of all. Did you like the red? Yeah.
Love it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a challenge. It remains a challenge. It's just doing a lot of research, a lot of development, keep trying different things. It's a very new science. And so it's a lot of experimentation, I guess, Willy Wonka style, like in the chocolate factory, but with non-alcoholic wine. I work with my winemakers like that. So they are the masters of the blending and the making. And I am, I guess, the master of the palate, if I dare say. And so we work together on that creation, exactly like I did with champagne. But you've raised a really good point about sugar. And it's a dagger in my heart, anyone who's launching in this category and building up the palate with sugar and chemicals, exactly like cheap alcoholic bottles, the same way. And if you're going to replace alcohol with sugar, I would argue just as bad. You could argue worse. I mean, it's not a good plan. And so I would say to everybody getting into the non-alcoholic space, check my back labels, check other back labels, look for too much sugar, look out for E numbers, look out for chemicals, look out for things you don't recognize. We don't make it that easy on the back label legislation, and that's not. I would love to shout from the rooftops and have it really clear, but legislation in each country can make it quite tricky. And so I think in America, we have a nutritional table that is much bigger and clearer because we come under the food authority. I won't get to nobody wants to get drowned out with this conversation, but basically do demand from whichever non-alcoholic wine you're drinking to know what's in your bottle.
Yeah.
Watch out for your sugar levels, watch out for your E numbers, watch out for chemicals, things you don't recognize. And it shouldn't be the consumer's job. I'm not allowed to, probably not allowed to swear, but it does naff me off because it's my job. It's the brand's job. And I think, brands should be much more open and transparent. And I think another pillar of our success is that trust and transparency piece, right? And I think that it's not the consumer's job. Everybody's time poor. And when you've got a tiny label, most of us, your eyes go cross trying to read what's in there.
Yeah.
So, email your, whichever the brand is and say, what is in your bottle? Give me your ingredients list.
You're ambitious. You have such vision. This is an extraordinary place that you're in with Noughty, and where you're going, and obviously you're doing some incredible things for entrepreneurs. What's your where is this going? Where are you going with this now?
So I'm creating a household name. That's what really I'm aiming for here in the US, UK, certainly to some degree, Europe, Asia, but the two countries are my pillars. And a legacy of that idea of elevating people's lives, creating moments of happiness and joy, and you're making that health choice without realizing it. For me, that's the magic of what I'm doing. And it kind of does make me well up a bit. I'm not very sentimental. I'm not a very emotional person. The Americans are being good. My American friends are being good at helping me to be more open about that because us Brits are very contained. But it does make me well up to think about that because that is always what's guided me here. And that for me is hugely exciting.
Well, I'm so excited for you. And I feel it's been such a lovely moment to have you on the podcast today, but also to have met you, to have had that.
I hope I've made a new friend. I think you felt like that when we met.
Because I know it's been a difficult year or so for you. So I commend everything you do. And honestly, I love it. I can't stop telling everyone about it. And I'm going to, obviously, we will work together and do lots in the future. I love you because of all that you do, and I love the power of 3: Eat, Nourish, Love, inspire, engage, bring people together. It's really important for me. And I know sometimes you talk about your one thing, but I'd like to ask you, if you can, what 3 things would you like to leave our listeners with today that either about business or about self-discovery? What 3 things are really important in your life?
So I had a little notebook because I'd listened before. So I've jotted a couple of bits down, 3 things down. So the first thing is a phenomenal female leader in the UK tech space, Jacqueline de Royas. She was in a really early stage mentor, and I always think you always remember the people who are really kind to you in the beginning when it's just like the idea. And Jacqueline de Royas, one of her mottos is, I've got to get this right, is if you think you can't change the world, think about the impact of a mosquito in a room. I've probably not put it as pithily as she would, but it's that idea that how much of an impact that mosquito has in your room when you're trying to sleep. And that is you, and you will impact if you are prepared to put the time, the passion, the tenacity in. So that's the first thing, just that beautiful little concept. I think it's a very small world, actually, despite where we are with tech. I think even though, sadly, some people are much lonelier, I think it remains a very small world in a literal sense. And I think that be kind, because I think that I'm not religious, I'm open-minded, but I do believe in karma. And I think it's amazing what comes back round. And I think kindness, not the cliche of kindness, but actual kindness,
Yes.
it comes back and matters. And then you put it beautifully, but it's always top of my list to think about curiosity, open-mindedness, questions. The best people, I think, go to their grave knowing they don't know everything and wanting to know stuff. Isn't the Japanese phrase, I'm not going to pronounce it correctly, ikigai, what is your purpose? Yeah. And that should have no limit with age.
Absolutely, so powerful. And thank you so much. And I know everyone will love those and take those away. Just so that everyone can know, where can they buy Noughty? Where can they find you? Just anything before we leave.
Sure. Well, we're all over the UK, all over the US, and lots of places around the world. I'm sure people listen and watch you wherever. But the best way is at our website, which is noughtyaf.com. We had a bit of fun with the AF in America. Alcohol-free. And that's Noughty with an O. It's a play on words for 0%.
Amanda, thank you so much. It's been such a lovely, lovely interview with you and getting to know you even more. And I look forward to trying lots more of this. And I hope our listeners will really enjoy and engage with it. Thank you so much.
It was an absolute pleasure. And if anyone wants to contact us, the team is directly contactable. I'm directly contactable via our website. We've kept full control of our customer service, so you can talk to us anytime.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Amanda.